morning, everybody. Hope you're having a wonderful Friday already. I know the day's still getting started, but I hope it's already off to a good start for you. This is the day the Lord has made. We should be glad and rejoice in it. Well, look, I've got a number of things I want to talk to you about today. I'll mention the dinner that's coming up on May the 16th. We do have complimentary tickets available. If you want to go, email us at vanity@standamerica.us. I'm going to give you a new address, but right now that one will do. RSVP at vanity@standamerica.us, and then we'll walk you through the process of getting your tickets. Remember, these dinners are costly. The generosity of our sponsors makes it possible for us to offer complimentary tickets to people. If you say you're planning to go, if you're planning to go and you get tickets and then you can't go, please, you've got to let us know, because we don't want to waste money on dinners that nobody's going to eat to the tune of $150 a piece. So with that said, if you'd like to come, and we'd love to have you come, email vanity@standamerica.us. I'm going to have a different address for you, but that's the one we're starting with because we don't have anything else set up at the moment, but we'll get something else set up. So that's one thing. And please don't forget, it is Friday. I usually emphasize giving on Friday, but I've been sort of doing it on a more consistent basis because we're trying to get our Patriot partners up to an additional 200 and, what was it, an additional 262, so that we hit the 500 mark before December 31, or by December 31, 2023. Help us. Go to standamerica.us. If you sign up to be a Patriot partner for any amount lower than $25, we'll send you a free Stand t-shirt. And you can go on the website and see there's a bunch of them. I think we have one picked out, Stand for America, but we will also give you a different one if you let us know that. We'll send you something different. But if you sign up for $25 or more per month as a Stand Patriot partner, we will send you a free signed and numbered copy of my new book, Sweet Land of Liberty, Reflections of a Patriot Descended from Slaves. It's available wherever books are sold, and you can get it at a 15% discount from our publisher. The website is faithfultext.com, faithfultext.com. Our publisher is Fidelis. You know, I find myself, folks, waking up thinking about the degeneration of our culture. I really do. I really do. I've been having dreams about it. Something is happening in America that, in my view, is unprecedented. It really is. And the only thing I can liken it to is the period leading up to the Civil War. Now, I'm not predicting a civil war. I don't want a civil war. God forbid. But in terms of the stark division in our culture, it very much reminds me of that. As you all know, I'm a student of history. I don't call myself an expert. I don't think I qualify to do that, but I'm a student of history. And I just finished reading a biography of James Buchanan, considered to be the worst president in our country's history. And I didn't read it because I was really interested in James Buchanan. I read it because I was interested in the period surrounding him. Because, of course, he's the last president before the Civil War. And I tell you, folks, it was an eye-opener. It really was. It was an eye-opener. Because what began to happen was that the moral vision of two sections of the country had become so discordant that it was irreconcilable. It was irreconcilable. There was just no working it out. And of course, the last opportunity to do so was James Buchanan, and he was, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, he deserves to be ranked the worst president in the history of the country. He was a vacillator. The man had no moral core, had no sense of convictions whatsoever. You know, he was a pro-Southern and pro-slavery Northerner. Yeah, Buchanan was from Pennsylvania, but he was very much a soul of the South, if you will, the pro-slavery South. It got so stark. I mean, I think of when Charles Sumner talked about oh, the guy's name is Andrew, but he was a cousin of Preston Brooks, and Charles Sumner gave a speech arguing that he had been seduced by the mistress of slavery and using kind of sexual language, not like the explicit stuff you hear today, but the images of kind of sex and adultery and fornication with the mistress of slavery. And Preston Brooks took such offense that he walked over to the house. He was a congressional representative, walked over to the floor of the Senate and literally almost beat Charles Sumner to death with his cane. Almost beat him to death. I mean, the man took 2 years to recover. Preston Brooks died shortly thereafter, died about a year later. Charles Sumner lived through that and came back to the Senate. But I mean, that's how stark it was. Northerners cheered John Brown, Southerners feared John Brown. You know, the Harper's Ferry debacle and you know, all of that, trying to inspire a slave insurrection. But that's how stark it was. And folks, it really is that stark today. It really is. And you know, while it's not sectional north-south, it really is becoming increasingly blue versus red states. So even though you've got people obviously in blue states that are conservative, and you've got people obviously in red states that are liberal, the states are being governed from red or blue from two very different, starkly different philosophies. And this is why, you know, polls show that people think we are going to have a civil war in America. Now, here again, I don't want that. I'll do everything in my power to prevent that. But just the fact that that sentiment is out there, that feeling is out there, I don't think there's ever been a time in our history since the Civil War when that was true. When a poll like that would show, yeah, Americans think we're going to have a civil war. But the polls show now, some polls show a majority, some close to half of Americans think that within the next few years, America will erupt into a civil war. We need leadership in our country that understands this and that understands what the real solution is. I mean, we've got several crises that we're facing, multiple crises that we're facing right now. But once again, folks, I am convinced, and I come back to this singular truth: America needs to return to God. Because everything that we are facing, all the things that are going wrong in our country, go back to the idea, or can be traced back to the idea, that many of our citizens have rejected God, therefore rejected absolute truth, and are simply making up stuff as they go along, and whatever they say goes if they have the power to implement it. And right now, the homosexual and gender-confused activists have convinced America that our understanding of sexual morality, have convinced many Americans, I should say, they've certainly convinced this administration, that our understanding of sex and sexual morality have been wrong all along, that they've been wrong throughout human history, that the Bible is wrong, that Christians are wrong, and that there's a new way that we've got to look at this. There's no such thing as gender. People can be in one kind of body but have another kind of spirit or soul. I don't know what they, how they, but in other words, you're a man, but there's a woman on the inside. Don't ask me to explain that because it's inexplicable. It can't be explained because it's fantasy. It's depraved fantasy that two men can get married to one end. They can't have children. Oh, yes, they can. Yeah, they can go through some sort of, manipulation of science and hiring a surrogate, and they can go through a whole bunch of different little weird steps and produce a kid for their own amusement. But they can't have children. They can't do what my wife and I and many of you watching me have done, which is to come together, as Jesus said, as one flesh and produce children that are an amalgam between those two parents, that are like their mother and their father because they've got DNA from both and they are produced by both, and they are a reproduction, if you will, of that union in the form of another human being, distinct and different from its parents, but carrying the genetic legacy of their parents with them. Two homosexuals can't do that. It's impossible. Two women, two lesbians can't do that. It's impossible. But we're supposed to accept the lie that, well, it doesn't, no, it's not impossible. We can, through the miracle of modern science, we can make anything happen. I mean, it's just, it's sick. It borders on insanity, frankly. It certainly is delusional, all of it. If you tune into my radio program today, I'm going to play a clip from an incident that happened, I think it was in California. Don't hold me to exactly where, but these three older gentlemen, and when I say older, that means older than me. So, older gentlemen were recruited to be in this show where each of them was going to be paired with a drag queen. And one of them was black, one looked Asian, the other one looked white. And not that any of that matters, but I think that was intentional, kind of diverse. And they were walking them through the process, and the black guy says, no touching, no touching. And so the drag queen look at him and go, okay, all right, no touching. So then they're supposed to walk up behind these guys, with these guys facing the camera. They're supposed to walk up behind them. And the guys are supposed to look up with some kind of fascination, admiration, and they say, and you say, oh, who is this? And when the black guy is approached, and he's supposed to look up, he just throws his hands up and says, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. And later on they interview him and ask him, well, what's the issue? And he says, I'm a man of God. And this time we stood up against this stuff. I don't know what they told him to lure them into this, but it obviously was not what he expected. And when he realized what was expected of him, he walked away. And one of the other guys, I'm not sure which one, started to lecture him on, you need to grow up. You need to grow up. Oh, you're going to bring up the God stuff. You're going to bring up. But this is where we are. The country is divided between those who believe in God and still adhere to God's will, God's plan, God's program, God's purpose for mankind, and those who reject that and say, as this one guy says, well, that's grow up. He said, grow up. Like, all that God stuff is immature. Grow up. So if you are pulling people into the abyss of sexual depravity, that's great. That's mature. You're a wonderful person. But if you are refusing and standing up against it and saying, this is wrong in the sight of God, and in fact, he said, the guy said, God didn't make men to wear women's clothes. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but that's what he said. And then, of course, the other guys thought that, oh man, he's not, what's the problem? What's the issue? Oh, they were bragging about how open they were to it. My point is, and you can go right down the line, everything boils down to those who embrace truth as absolute and inviolable, and those who believe there's no such thing other than what they make up. So see, these people tell you, well, there's no such thing as truth. But then they say, but the truth is that there's no such thing as a man or a woman. Well, now, which is it? But what they really mean is there's no such thing as God's truth. There's no such thing as absolute truth to which we must all be accountable. The truth is what I say it is. That's what it boils down to. And once I say it's the truth, if I've got the power to enforce it, then that's the truth, and you better bow down to it. The pediatric community is now buying into, I think I've got this, is buying into the whole critical race theory thing and teaching new pediatricians that this is the way they have to behave. It's called the National Child Trauma Stress Network, something formed by the government back, I think, in 2001. But it's there to help pediatricians understand how to treat trauma in children. It's a 22-page document that, quote, affirms critical race theory and calls the industry, I'm not quoting now, but it affirms critical race theory and calls the industry to approach medical treatment through, quote, health equity. Health equity. And so, for example, now I'm quoting. It is titled, this document is titled, Being Anti-Racist is Central to Trauma-Informed Care. Principles of an Anti-Racist Trauma-Informed Organization. Now, does any of that sound like healthcare? No. It's all about racializing and, frankly, politicizing health treatment. And you say, well, Bishop Jackson, you said this is all a rejection of God. And let me show you something that I think is extremely telling in this. Extremely. It says that pediatric care should be equity-based. It should be governed by equity-based principles and power redistribution. Let me see if I can find this quote in here, because this is extremely telling. I'll tell you what it is because I might not be able to find it. But what it says is we must reject individuality and embrace collectivism. That's basically what it says. And you know what that is. Oh, here it is. It gives a number of anchors that should be used now by the pediatric community. And it says among those anchors is, quote unquote, quote, collectivism. Collectivism, which it defines as connection of personal liberation with that of broader BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. So collectivism must be seen as the connection of personal liberation with that of the broader BIPOC communities. Now, I wanted you to hear that because collectivism is associated with Marxism and communism, because what it does is it denigrates and devalues the individual and says what matters is the collective consciousness, the collective group. Individuals don't matter. The collective matters. Here's a pediatric organization that is buying into Marxist ideology. And what is the first principle of Marxism? There is no God. We can solve all of our problems ourselves by simply adhering to Marxist principles. We can create, this is my particular way of saying it, Marx says, we can create the kingdom of God without God. Utopia, perfection. We can perfect people by simply putting them in a system that lends itself toward the perfection of people. Individuals can't matter in such a process. It's the masses that one must be concerned about. It's collective identity that one must be concerned about. So I'm not an individual. I'm not E.W. Jackson, my own thoughts, my own ideas, my own vision, my own convictions. No. I'm simply part of the collective that you call black people. And all of my thoughts, all of my actions, all of my ideas, all of my ideals, all of my convictions should be controlled and shaped and limited by the collective consciousness. And there is no God to whom I owe accountability. There is no God I must obey. I must obey the collective. That is my God. This is really the dictatorship of the proletariat expressed in different terms. I call it the American version of Marxism, where you use race instead of class, because class doesn't work as well because we are such an upwardly mobile nation that class won't work. It breaks down because people start in poverty and end up in wealth, and so you can't convince them that somehow they are oppressed and economically there's no hope. But if you can tie race to the notion of collective collective oppression, then you can convince people like LeBron James and Oprah Winfrey and other very wealthy, very successful Americans of African ancestry that they are oppressed. They're billionaires, but they're oppressed. They're worth hundreds of billions of dollars, but they're oppressed. They're victims of a horrible system. I mean, Michelle and Barack Obama sold that song. I mean, they sold it while he was president. Well, he was president of the United States, whining about how oppressed he was and how people criticize him just because he's black. Most powerful man in the world, whining. Well, I have no respect for him whatsoever. None. Just none. To me, it's just such a punkish move. Well, you know what? They're reputedly now billionaires. Yeah, reputedly, the Obamas are billionaires. They've never built anything. They've never created anything. They've never made anything. They've never invented anything. They've never innovated anything. They've never manufactured anything. They're billionaires on politics, on radical leftist politics, and they were being rewarded for it. But I tell you what, they ain't oppressed. Not in the sense in which they want to convince us all that we are. They are spiritually oppressed because they don't realize that they're children of the devil and they're being led by Satan. Yeah, I said it because I mean it. You know, the Bible doesn't make these little cute distinctions that leftists like to make. I don't care what people call themselves. They can call themselves a hamburger. It doesn't make them one. But Jesus said, he that is not with me is against me. He that does not gather with me scatters abroad. Jesus said, heaven and earth will pass away, but my word will not pass away. Not one dot, not one tittle will pass away until all is fulfilled. And then you have people coming along and say, well, the Bible's wrong. But I'm a Christian. You're a liar is what you are. And you're a child of the devil is what you are. And that includes anybody who tries to pull that from the wealthiest, most influential, most powerful, to the weakest pauper. When you take that attitude that, well, I'm a Christian, but there's nothing wrong with drag queens. There's nothing wrong with homosexuality. There's nothing wrong with fornication. There's nothing wrong with, oh, no. You can be polyamorous. There's nothing wrong with any of that. You're a liar. Just like your father, the devil, and the deeds of your father you will do. He was a liar and a murderer from the beginning, and you're just like him. And if you want to get delivered, you need to repent from all that and accept Jesus Christ in all of his glory, in all of his holiness, in all of his beauty, in all of his sinlessness. Let me end with this, folks. I hundreds, and that's not an exaggeration. It really is not. Over the years, hundreds of people have said to me, you know, I wish you would run for president. I wish you'd run for president. I wish you'd run for president. Every time I go, I mean, where was I recently where somebody, just yesterday on my radio program, somebody called up and said, you know, I wish you'd run for president. I'll tell you something. If I could ever be convinced to take that gargantuan step, and it is a gargantuan step, I think anybody who runs for president who thinks that you are somehow inherently qualified, I don't care what your background is, you probably shouldn't be president, because I think it is the biggest and most difficult job in the world. And I don't think anybody's ever truly qualified. You know, I just said I finished the biography of James Buchanan. Do you know historians believe that James Buchanan was probably the most qualified person to become president of the United States? I mean, he's a former, held many, many cabinet positions, former Congress, I think he was former Secretary of State, but held many, many cabinet positions, just basically had a resume that was second to none, and a terrible president. I don't think anybody can measure what it takes. I think it's in here as much as it is in here. But having said that, if I could ever be convinced to do that, I'll tell you what it would be. It would be that nobody is saying what ultimately needs to be said, and that is this. America must come back to God. America must come back to the most essential founding principle of our existence. There is a God. We are accountable to him. And our rights and our liberties come from him, not from human agency. Because to me, that's the root of our problems. You know, when you hear Jerry Nadler say that the floor of Congress will not recognize anybody's claim of what the will of God is. Yeah, well, that's the problem. When you hear Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, and a bunch of others quote the Declaration of Independence and leave out God, we are endowed, but they don't want to say by whom. That's the root of the problem. Because they want to make up rights that they know God will not endow. And when you hear people excoriate Christians and call us Taliban and say we are the equivalent of terrorists who are trying to kill people, when all we do is pray for people and try to persuade people, that is the root of the problem. And somebody has got to stand up and say, America must come back to God. Because without that, there is no future. Without that, we probably will have a civil war. Because until America returns to the principles that once unified us, the principles we say in our Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. No wonder Democrats and leftists don't like saying that, because they don't believe that. They don't want us to be under God. It is my prayer that leadership will arise, that will speak honestly to the American people about who we are and where we've come from. You know, Breitbart said politics is downstream from culture. In other words, culture influences and controls politics. I would add to that, but spirituality or culture is downstream from spirituality. So when the spirituality becomes bankrupt, the culture becomes bankrupt. When the culture becomes bankrupt, the politics become bankrupt. And so we've got to go back to the fount, back to the source of what is needed to make a society healthy. And for us, our success has been based upon the fact that we are a godly nation. John Adams said it. Our Constitution was designed for moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the governance of any other. George Washington said the same thing, that anybody who says that we can govern ourselves without the Bible and morality shouldn't even be called a patriot. Now, folks, that's not a popular message, or at least certainly not with the mainstream media and the cultural influencers. But I really think that that's a message that resonates with the American people, because everybody can see that we are falling into a dark hole of moral depravity. And many are celebrating it. And we got to put the brakes on. There's no question about it. We've got to put the brakes on. So, God bless each and every one of you. Let's keep praying for our country. Let's pray for leadership to arise that will help lead us out of the mess that we're in. Righteousness exalts a nation. Sin is a reproach to any people. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. And of course, there are a bunch of presidential candidates out there. Who knows who will emerge, right? Who knows who will emerge? Who knows who will capture the zeitgeist? Who knows who will capture the hearts and the imagination of the American people this time around? But that's what I'm praying for, and I hope you are too, because that's what we need at every level, by the way. Not just the president, but at every level. So look, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. For those of you who are in my area, I am going to be at my church on Sunday, this coming Sunday at 11 a.m. for our worship service. We'll start live streaming the service at about 11:20 or so. But if you're in the area, come on by. It's 943 Canal Drive in Chesapeake, Virginia. We've had people drive as far as 3 hours up from North Carolina and other places to come visit with us. So we're always glad to see you, always glad to meet you. Be sure, particularly if you've driven that far, please be sure to let an usher, let somebody know, because I don't want to leave without shaking hands with you and saying hello to you. Look, folks, we are going to win, and we're going to win without a violent civil war, because we're going to win by turning our hearts toward Almighty God, and we're going to win with an awakening that I really believe God himself is going to engineer, because we, his people, have been crying out to him to have mercy on our beloved country. So you stand up, step up, speak up, and refuse to back up, because we cannot be defeated if we will not quit, because we are on God's side.